Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Fortified Life podcast, where we are passionate about building a dependency on Jesus in the marketplace. I'm your host, Jason Davis, aka Mr. Fortify. Every week, we have the opportunity to bring on authors, speakers, coaches, CEOs, leaders of nonprofits who are also passionate about putting God back in business. Today is another addition to our tools and resources series where you take tools, resources, frameworks, ideas, products, even that you can apply in both your personal and professional life immediately, not just theory, but reality. And folks, I am very excited. Joining us on today's episode is someone that I have gotten to know in the our recent time together. And I got to tell you, folks, she is so exciting. But let me tell you a little bit more about her. Gloriana Teh. She founded Claritas Consulting and Coaching to equip people leaders with data and provide leadership development for leaders of technical teams and STEM professionals so you can build thriving and accomplish more by connecting the head and the heart. Thriving teams, that is. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Fortified Life podcast, Gloriana Teh. Gloriana, what's going on?
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me. It's always
Absolutely.
good to see you.
Yes, definitely good to see you, Gloriana. Gloriana, today for tools and resources, we're actually going to unpack something that you are really familiar with, and that's conflict resolution. And folks, more specifically, Gloriana has a lot of different frameworks that she has built over the years that she works with clients. And so we're going to talk about actually how to reduce conflict and with what she calls paradoxical leadership. So listen, Gloriana, I am not the expert. I'm just let's start with let's give a little background. How did you even get into what you're doing now? And then we'll set up the tool and the resource and dive right in. So tell the audience about yourself a little bit.
Yeah. So I've always been interested in psychology. Even when I was in college, I was managing a team and, you know, it, I'm a chemical engineer by training, spent almost 20 years in the industry. And I was frustrated by how we only took literally like one snapshot. The annual performance review is the only time we recorded data about our people.
Right.
And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. We would never run a business this way. We look at those numbers weekly, maybe daily sometimes, at least monthly, quarterly. It's very frequent that we're looking at numbers from a business standpoint, from a process standpoint. We don't make process changes unless we really understand what's different or what needs to be changed. And so that's I think, a little bit of why I ended up doing what I'm doing because I felt like we have such smart, capable people. And then leadership is not an easy transition, it's challenging. And so, how can we use data and information to really help leaders navigate that transition easier, especially technical leaders, because they're not dealing with people every day, right? So, I think that's really why I started Claritas, was to bridge this, what I saw as this disconnect between the head and the heart. And a lot of it has to do with my journey as well. The Some things came naturally to me, Jason. I was always good at somehow leading teams. Like my boss would ask me, what is it you're doing? And I really couldn't explain it very well to him back then, but I can now. And other parts were a lot more challenging. Conflict was one of those areas. Like I really had to learn a lot about myself, and not just tools and techniques, but like, how do I show up in the middle of conflict as well? And how do might other people show up?
You know, Gloriana, thanks for that intro. And the audience, I'm telling you, just wait till we unpack it all. I love what you said about connecting the head and the heart, Gloriana, because when you're thinking about leadership and even conflict, I feel like there's certain things going on in people's heads other things going on in their heart, and then it makes it to our mouth, and it's like that's not quite what was in mind. So I love that you talked about being a bridge between the two, because that plays such a huge role, especially in conflict and in leadership. Now, Gloriana, to set things up, I just want to tell the people, when you hear the word leadership and then you hear the word paradox, maybe we could start there, because some people are they're scratching the chin, scratching the head. Gloriana, I'm with you singularly on leadership. I'm even with you singularly on the paradox. When you put the two together, explain that.
Oh, leadership is full of paradoxes. I mean, you're having to like balance oftentimes between short-term results and long-term objectives. You're having to balance between that you're willing to take. You're having to balance between the individual people, how to motivate them personally versus the needs of the organization. So it's inherently paradoxical. It is, so I think it's actually a very helpful framework. And there's different types of leadership styles that, if we were to zoom out, like servant leadership, for example, that's a paradox, right?
Hmm.
Because you're in a leadership position, yet the humility and the willingness to serve may seem like it's contradictory to what some people may perceive as what a leader should look like. Situational leadership is another form of leadership where it's you're supporting or directing, and sometimes you need to be doing both, and sometimes it's one or the other, and being able to adjust. So there, when we talk about paradoxes, these ideas of two things that at first seem opposite, but are in fact synergistic or complementary. And when we can tap into that, I think we could show up as stronger, better leaders.
That's that's good, Gloriana, especially bringing up servant leadership. That's a big one. It's like, wait a minute, but I'm the person. And
Yeah.
then what do you mean serving? I love the language that you gave. So, Gloriana, let's unpack the framework. So now that we understand the definition and some examples of, wow, you know what, that is a paradox. So how do I actually work with people, and how do I go about resolving conflict? Let's dive in.
Yes. So it came, I had a conversation with, her name's Dr. Jill Long, and this is, I think, what sparked me to really get thinking about this. I'm trained and a certified Harrison assessments provider, and one of the core reports that Harrison has is literally called a paradox report, Jason. And what we see, so I was explaining this to Dr. Long, and I was saying what Dr. Harrison has found is when we don't value the complementary paradox, then often we can view it negatively. And I'll give an example. The one I like to use is around communication. And the two paradoxical traits when it comes to communication are being frank or being diplomatic. Some people tend to be a lot more direct in their communication style. Other people tend to be more indirect in their communication style. And I had a client once that his preference was really just to be more direct, right? So I asked him, how do you view people that are more indirect when they talk to you? And he said, I think they're being insincere or hiding something.
Mm,
Do you think that might cause some conflict?
absolutely. What happened to the trust building?
Yes. Yeah, and vice versa, right? Somebody that maybe has a more indirect communication style, if somebody's super blunt with them, they may feel hurt, they may feel offended, and there may be no malintent, but there's damage done when we are not that that it's okay to want to actually be when it comes to communication. And here's that paradoxical leadership skill, right? It's not radical candor that we're after. Radical candor doesn't work too well. I know there's a book called Radical Candor. Kim Scott's actually written another book. I don't know if people know this, called Radical Respect. So, yeah. person just calls it respectful candor, because that's really what we're after, is being able to communicate directly enough, but politely, nicely, right, to get our communication across. And when, it's one or the other, the chances of that miscommunication increases. However, when we are more aware of these differences in communication styles and this paradox, once you really know someone, right, you're like, that's just how he is. He tends to come across that way, or she tends to come across this way. And we tend to be a little bit more open to that. But when we don't know someone, right, being aware of this paradox can perhaps help us to avoid some of that miscommunication and conflict.
It makes a lot of sense. And the, not to go down a book or anything, but the terminology, I certainly understand. And like you said, supportive versus being more direct. Man, especially if you're in a management role, having a one on one, or even just in a meeting, a team meeting, and somebody just their personality style is a little bit more versus the other one. So I see a lot of examples, Gloriana, where just on a day-to-day basis, you have those two competing communication styles or even thought processes. So, Gloriana, in your opinion, once you, because I feel like the first step is awareness, right? And I love that's what the assessment does. Now, I'm sure we could nerd out for hours on the assessment alone, but Gloria, am I tracking? So, there's the awareness brings clarity. Claritas, you all see what I did there. So the awareness brings clarity, but once you're aware, Gloriana, now we've got to act now, right? It's not just enough for
Yeah.
me to know. So
Yeah.
how do you help people get from the, oh, okay, I see where that's showing up. Now what do I do?
Yes. Absolutely. So the assessment has 12 of these paradoxical pairs, Jason. And
Hmm,
some people, like you said, awareness, because it's not that we're trying to always show up with that paradox. Sometimes we have to adjust our styles. Sometimes we just have natural tendencies, but there are ways to change how that impact shows up
yeah.
negatively. So it's really a lot to do with the follow, right? Like you said, change starts with awareness. I completely, wholeheartedly agree with that. And that's why just reading a book or taking the assessment is not necessarily the end all be all. The coaching is a big part of helping people through that behavioral shift, because these are the beauty of this is it's based more on behavior than personality, and behavior is something we can choose to change. And they're literally exercises that I can help people with as far as walking through some of this, and also different resources depending on what paradox there it is that they're wanting to work on.
That's good. Gloriana, it sounds like everybody needs to take this assessment, right? So, Gloriana, in thinking about the framework, and I love and this is on, by the way, folks, we'll have all this in the show notes. She's got a awesome blog. I love the setup, Gloriana. We've got the problem, we've got the conflict, which is more of the symptom, and then we've got underground the values. And folks, if you saw this visual, it is a plant, and then there's dirt and there's roots down below, and up top the flower, the part that everybody can see, that's the you have the conflict section, you got the problem up top, and then you got the values down below, which is a just such a stunning visual, Gloriana, because I was seeing where you're going there. Unpack that visual for us, because I don't even know if we consciously realize how the three of those are factoring together when it comes to resolving conflict.
Yeah. So I was thinking of how to visualize this, like you were saying, Jason. And the image is that flower is a dandelion. It's a
Mm. Ooh,
like
not
they're
weeds.
from
Oh no.
and
Oh.
they're pesky, right? They can
Y-
they if you just pluck off the dandelion, it's not going to get rid of the problem. And my background, like I mentioned, as an engineer, we did a lot of what's called is root cause analysis. Oftentimes when we have an issue, and in this case, it's conflict, right? We're trying to address the symptom, but really, if we don't get to the root cause, those issues are just going to keep popping back up. So it's a bit like that dandelion. If we just pluck the dandelion, the roots are still there, right? It's just going to grow back. And the other thing about it is that what if we don't pluck the dandelion? What happens then?
Ooh, yeah.
Then, if those seeds start spreading all over the place, now you end up with lots of dandelions and lots more problems. So it is important to address the conflict earlier rather than later, because otherwise, it can start to fester. So the conflict is the symptom, right? The root cause is a difference in values. Yeah. And this is remember when I was mentioning I was talking to Dr. Long, and that's what really resonated with her. Her research is based on looking at those differences in values and how do they attribute to causing conflict. And it aligns with those paradoxes, right? We value things differently. I know you've done a lot of project management, and so this example might resonate, Jason. It's the classic waterfall versus agile. That's another paradox, being organized versus being flexible. And what happens if we devalue one versus the other? It can really cause, especially in situations where it would make sense to be using a little bit of both and use more of a hybrid approach. If we lean too far one way versus the other, that can actually cause more problems.
Wow. Gloriana, this I feel like I just got a download off of your of the image. So this forgive me if this comes off as just humorous, but I couldn't, that phrase spreading like a wildflower.
And
That it hit me because in all seriousness, listeners, conflict, we humans, we generally don't want to, some depending on your personality, but generally speaking, we just don't wake up looking for a fight per se. So when you described that, Gloriana, it made me think about, wow, when conflict is unresolved, it spreads, and now all of a sudden that one pesky weed, now it's all over your garden, all over your grass. Now it's impacting things like culture, decision making, so many different aspects of business. So that is a powerful visual. And that's just something that I got. Oh, conflict is pesky. You need to make a shirt about that. Gloria, I would buy that. Conflict is pesky. Beware. That's good. That's good. So, Gloriana, we talked about, and again, the example, radical candor. So now we have the visual. We're diving into the actual problem. What is the root, not the symptom? So, how do we have respectful candor now? Just as an example, how do we get there, especially if you're on one side or the other and you're aware and you go, okay, I recognize what I need to do. How can be more balanced? Or in some instances, Gloriana, I've heard it said it this way: how do I dial up and dial down when I need to?
yeah. So the biggest thing to be aware of, so there's a second part to it, and it ties into your question, Jason. Oftentimes, the conflict arises when we're triggered,
My
right?
goodness. That's the new profane word in today's time, Gloriana,
Yeah.
is triggers. Yeah.
And stress is also a
Yo.
component that contributes to how easily we're triggered. So
Mm.
being aware, okay, if we're like, it a lot of times there will come this tipping point where it's like you just had it and then something happens, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost to recognize what before it just blows up or happens, how do we catch ourselves and
Yeah.
realize, oh, things are escalating. This is not good. I've already not had a good day. I just need to walk away. We need to have this conversation another time or take it offline, like not during the group meeting. We need a one on one. So those type of things to recognize before and try and catch it. It doesn't always, it's not always possible, Jason, but even if I had one client, she went through the paradox report. I met with her the next time. She had the awareness and she came back and I said, how did things go between this time and last time? And she said, I avoided a train wreck. And I'm like, oh, that's actually probably bad because you can avoid a train wreck between
Yes,
last time and this time. That's a good thing.
absolutely. My goodness.
So
Wow. That is so huge. Folks, and we're laughing, but you could see how a lot of this stuff is funny. But now, the blowback of conflict a lot of times is not funny. But Gloriana, especially when you get down to the values level, have you found when you're coaching that sometimes, depending on what the issue is, that the people, it's like, you know what, I don't even remember why I got upset. I just dug in on my stance, and now we're in the coffee break room and I don't want to see you. I'm in a team meeting. I sit on the other
yeah,
side of the room and all of this. And it's like, wait a minute. What did we even, what did we do? What did I do? What did you do? Let's start over.
yeah,
What's the breakthrough been like after the awareness, after the, and I love the, I avoided a train where, so the, I know you'll love this too, just with the continuous improvement, the Kaizen, the small step. How do we keep walking toward that and not get stuck or afraid to continue resolving the conflict, Gloriana? Because I've just found that, again, that example where we're sitting on the opposite side of the room, we don't even remember. So sometimes we use the tactic of avoidance. But how do we, like with your client, it's like, didn't cause a train wreck? How do we encourage them to keep going, keep going?
it's the small wins, Jason. Like it
Mm,
doesn't have to start with the really big stuff, right? It's almost like I came coaching to working like a physical trainer. If you've never
yeah,
lifted weights before and you go in and you're wanting to lift 50 pounds right away and do bicep curls, you may not be able to, you might need to start with something a little lighter, like 8 or 10 pounds. So
yeah.
it's, if we go in with the expectation, oh, now I'm going to be able to deal with any type of conflict that arises, I think that's a bit unrealistic. It's getting the reps in to practice. The more that we practice, the easier it becomes. And I'll share a little bit of a personal story. I think some folks may be able to relate to this. DISC is a super popular assessment. A lot of people are familiar with it. I'm actually a pretty high S, and S's do not like conflict. So this is what I said. I've had to work on this. I don't mind change. I actually like change. Some S's tend to not like change as well. But for me, it's more the conflict. So what have I done to overcome that? First of all, when you're a project manager, you have to deal with a lot of conflict. It comes with the job. So I got the reps in because the nature of my job, even though I didn't like it. And here's the funny thing. When I took a 360 evaluation, my self-scoring on that particular area, the biggest gap between how people perceived me and how I perceived myself was related to conflict. They scored me on a 1 to 5 scale as over a 4, and I just put myself as a 3. And so that's the interesting part, is even though we may never like it, Jason, we may never really feel like we want to, it's not fun to deal with. It doesn't mean we can't become more effective at it.
That's well said. So Gloriana, obviously we want everybody to take the assessment. If people are dealing with conflict today and they don't know about the Harrison assessment, what's maybe the top 2 to 3 things for somebody to remember that they could do today when it comes to conflict? That, okay, this worked, that worked, then I'll call up Gloriana, then I'll email her, take the assessment. But what's, if I don't take the assessment, what are just some
Yes,
things off the top of your
absolutely.
head that I could do right now?
Yeah. So two things. Look for, is there a difference in values in what we value?
Okay.
What paradoxes might be at play? And this is simple. Some people value being very timely, like getting things done in a certain way. And other people are a lot more relaxed. So that could potentially cause some conflict. So looking for those differences in values And second of all, it's back to trying to become more aware of what are your triggers
Okay.
and avoiding that the situations where things are building to avoid the point where it goes over the edge, especially in
Mhm.
stressful situations.
Makes sense. So, folks, remember today, VT, values and trigger, VT or VNT. It's another shirt, Gloria. And I got a whole clothing line. Who knew that Frameworks Consulting and Coaching could produce t shirts? We made two today. I'm just saying, you heard it here on the Fortified Life. I know our time is coming to an end. What would you say is the next right step for someone to take in so there's personally, but in their organization as well? So Gloriana, we've had a lot of companies work on this post-COVID, post-pandemic
Mm.
world. So many things are shifting culturally, politically, all these different things are affecting the marketplace.
Yeah.
What's the next right step for a person or an organization and their team to take with conflict?
So I do believe if they've never done a team assessment before, Jason, it's good to do a
Mm,
team assessment because
okay.
then, we understand how are people different from us, be it DISC or be it Harrison. The Paradox report comes as a team assessment as well. And so it's very powerful once you can really start to see the differences and appreciate the differences that your teammates bring to the table.
I love that. Get the team involved. Team wins. Gloriana, I want to address the skeptic in the back of the room for a second. Like, Gloriana, this sounds really good. There's some nice, fluffy words, but for the skeptic, Gloriana, what's maybe the eyebrow raiser like if you don't buy into paradoxical leadership? What's the if then for that person? That's what I've done is worked up until this point. They need to be aware of paradoxical leadership because how would we finish that phrasing?
Yeah, the world's just a lot more complex, uncertain,
Mhm.
volatile. We need the old frameworks seem to struggle with that, Jason. And I think
Mm,
that's why this one is more robust in that sense, as far as if we're only willing to do things our way, eventually that's going to cause problems, right? And
yeah,
if we're not open to hearing how other people's perspectives and, where they're coming from, then yeah, then they'll continue dealing with a lot of conflict.
it's true. And around and around we go, right?
Yeah.
But Gloriana, this has been awesome, folks. We're gonna have to bring her back. So listen, she's got frameworks on top of framework, but also, folks, when you hear framework, there's practicality. So a lot of times people hear framework methodology, and it's like, it's some academic or some theory, but folks, we talked about a lot of living, breathing examples. And remember the shirt that Gloriana's going to make when we get off VNT. Remember your values and your triggers today, VNT. So, Gloriana, with your coaching, consulting, what's the best way for listeners to connect with you, your blog? How can they get started with the Harrison assessment? They're like, they listen to this, they saw your face, they said, all right, I'm ready to rock and roll. Where can I find her? Where can
Yeah.
they go, Gloriana?
On my website, it's claritasconsultcoach.com. It's got contact info. You can go ahead and book a discoveries call, complimentary. It's very easy. Or sign up for the blog, also on the website.
Awesome. Now, folks, now Gloriana and I could nerd out another 3 hours, but we can't do that. We've got to let her go. She's got to continue helping people resolve conflict. And so we'll have all of her information in the show notes. So don't you worry. You'll know exactly how to connect with her. And then you can get started on your paradoxical leadership journey. Gloriana, thank you so much for hanging out with us here on the Fortified Life. I think she will return, folks. If she'll be back, we've got a lot more to unpack. So, Gloriana, just thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jason. I had a lot of fun. So Have a good one.
For sure. Folks, that's all we have time for here on the Fortified Life podcast. You know how we leave things. Don't compartmentalize your faith in the marketplace. And from the boardroom to the bathroom, God is with you. We'll see you next time on the Fortified Life podcast.